Once upon a time, there was a man who had everything that most people only dream of: an empire of businesses, properties across continents, private jets, luxury cars, and enough money to never worry about a thing again. But in the quiet of his enormous mansion, surrounded by art, crystal chandeliers, and priceless antiques, he felt a deep emptiness that no luxury could fill. He had no family that he could truly trust. His friends were more like business partners, always expecting something in return. Over the years, he had watched people come into his life, smile at him, pretend to care, only to betray him later for their own benefit. Slowly, he built walls around his heart, isolating himself even as his bank accounts kept growing. But wealth without trust is a cage. At night, as he looked out from his penthouse balcony at the city lights, he wondered, if I died tomorrow, who would I leave all this to? He had seen enough of human nature to know that greed often disguises itself behind affection. He didn't want to make the mistake of passing his legacy to someone who would squander it, or worse, use it to harm others. Thus, he made a decision that many would call insane: to leave his world of privilege behind, to strip himself of everything that made him powerful in society's eyes, and live among those who had nothing. Why? Because he believed that when someone has nothing to gain from you, their true character is revealed. This philosophy, though radical, is rooted in psychological truth. Numerous studies in behavioral psychology confirm that people's real nature often surfaces in situations where social status and wealth play no role. For example, research from Princeton University found that those who perceive a person as wealthy or influential are more likely to treat them favorably, whereas the poor and marginalized are often ignored or mistreated. The millionaire wanted to bypass this bias and see people for who they really were, and see who would see him as a human being, not as a bank account. He carefully planned his departure from his opulent life. He cut off communication, put his businesses under the temporary management of his legal team, and emptied his appearance of any sign of wealth. Gone were the tailored Italian suits, the Rolex watches, the luxury cologne. Instead, he donned torn clothes he found at a thrift shop, didn't shave for weeks, and allowed his hair to become tangled and unkempt. With a small backpack, a blanket, and only a few dollars in his pocket, he stepped out of his mansion and into a world he had only ever glimpsed through tinted windows. The streets. What he encountered almost immediately shook him to his core. The stares of disdain, the way people crossed the street to avoid him, the restaurant owners who pushed him away, the complete invisibility. Living on the streets is a brutal experience, one that most people cannot imagine. According to the United Nations, over 150 million people worldwide are homeless, and more than 1.6 billion live in inadequate shelter. In the United States alone, over 500,000 people experience homelessness on any given night. But beyond the statistics lies a more painful reality: society's indifference. Our millionaire, now just another bum to the people who walked past him, felt the weight of this rejection deeply. In his previous life, he could enter any establishment and be treated with respect. Now in his disguise, he was reduced to a stereotype. He noticed how the world around him operated on unspoken rules. People judged you by your clothes, your smell, your posture. The minute you look like you live on the street, society assumes you've made poor choices, that you're dangerous, lazy, or addicted. Few pause to consider that many people end up homeless due to circumstances beyond their control: mental illness, job loss, domestic violence, or lack of affordable housing. These realizations struck him hard. His first night sleeping on cardboard boxes, exposed to the cold and the rain, he struggled not just physically but emotionally. For the first time in decades, he had to rely on the kindness of strangers, and found almost none. On his first day, he sat on a sidewalk with a small sign that simply read, "Hungry, please help." Hundreds passed by. Some glanced at him with a mixture of pity and discomfort before looking away quickly. Some whispered under their breath, assuming he was a drunk. A few cursed at him for polluting the neighborhood. Not a single person offered him food. By the end of that day, he realized something chilling, that people didn't just ignore him. They didn't even see him as human anymore. This form of social invisibility is a documented psychological phenomenon. A study conducted by researchers at Yale University found that when people pass by homeless individuals, the brain's medial prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for recognizing others as human beings with thoughts and feelings, shows significantly less activation. In other words, when society deems you worthless, it literally stops seeing you. The millionaire, now immersed in this painful reality, felt the walls of his own prejudices crumble. He realized that before this experiment, he too had been guilty of looking away, of assuming that every homeless person was just another addict or a failure. But now, cold, hungry, and alone, he understood their pain viscerally. Every day, as he roamed the streets, he became less the man he had been and more a part of this invisible population. He learned where to find shelters, how to line up for soup kitchens, how to guard his few possessions from being stolen at night. But most importantly, he began to observe the intricate, unspoken code among the homeless. Those who helped one another, those who preyed on the weak, and those who simply gave up, succumbing to despair. And yet, he also saw glimmers of extraordinary humanity. An older homeless man giving his last pair of socks to someone who had none. A woman sharing her sandwich with a stray dog, even though she hadn't eaten all day. These acts of kindness, often from those with absolutely nothing, challenged everything he thought he knew about wealth, generosity, and the human spirit. He started asking himself, is wealth truly measured by what you have, or by what you give? This was just the beginning of his journey. He had yet to meet the person who would change everything, who would restore his faith in humanity, and whom he would ultimately name as his heir. But for now, he was learning the hardest, most humbling lesson of all, that the value of a person is not found in their bank account or their social status, but in their heart. Every morning, he woke up to the sound of sirens, shouting, and the relentless noise of the city that never cared to notice his presence. His body ached from sleeping on concrete. His clothes clung to him with the grime and sweat of days without access to a proper shower. But more than the physical discomfort, it was the emotional weight that bore down on him. The realization that for the first time, he was experiencing what millions endure daily, with no escape. He moved from street to street, observing the hidden communities within the homeless population. He noticed that the streets had their own hierarchy, invisible to the average passerby, but deeply entrenched. There were those who controlled specific corners, those who protected others, and those who exploited the weak for scraps of food or loose change. It was a brutal microcosm of society itself, stripped of all its pretensions. One day, as he sat near a public park, trying to keep warm by huddling against a metal trash bin, he noticed a young man sitting a few feet away. The man was in his early 20s, wearing an oversized hoodie and shoes that barely held together with duct tape. Unlike many others on the street, this young man wasn't panhandling or asking for help. Instead, he was quietly reading a tattered copy of a book, its cover nearly worn off. Curious, the millionaire, now almost forgetting his own old identity, inched closer and asked softly, "What are you reading?" The young man looked up, smiled faintly, and replied, "It's The Count of Monte Cristo. Found it in a dumpster last week." That simple interaction sparked something profound in him. Here was someone who, despite being abandoned by society, clung to literature as a form of escape, as a way to keep his mind alive, even when his circumstances tried to crush him. They began talking, first about books, then about life, dreams, and survival on the streets. The young man introduced himself as Daniel. Over the following weeks, the millionaire and Daniel became unlikely companions. Daniel showed him where to find the safest places to sleep, how to avoid dangerous gangs, and even how to scavenge for food without getting into trouble. In return, the millionaire shared stories, carefully altered, of his past life, talking about business and philosophy without revealing his true identity. As their bond deepened, the millionaire noticed something extraordinary. Daniel, despite having every reason to be bitter or selfish, constantly helped others. He would share half his sandwich with a hungry stranger, give his spot at a shelter to an elderly man, or spend hours guiding a newly homeless person around the dangerous city blocks. The millionaire, watching all this, began to understand that compassion is not tied to wealth. It is a choice, an act of will. Psychological research supports this. A famous study published in Science magazine demonstrated that people with fewer resources often show greater empathy and generosity towards others. This is attributed to their heightened awareness of vulnerability, having lived through hardship themselves. Meanwhile, those with immense wealth can become insulated from suffering, leading to a decline in empathetic responses. Daniel embodied this principle perfectly. One evening, as they sat under a bridge, warming their hands over a small fire made from scavenged wood, the millionaire asked, "Why do you help so many people when you barely have enough for yourself?" Daniel shrugged and said, "Because I know what it feels like to have nothing. If I can make someone's day just a little less hard, why wouldn't I?" That simple answer hit the millionaire harder than any boardroom negotiation or stock market loss ever had. In Daniel, he saw the kind of integrity and kindness that he had long believed was extinct in the world, especially in the world he came from, where money often corrupted good intentions and kindness was transactional. But Daniel's generosity was pure, without expectation. Over time, the millionaire began to open up about his own vulnerabilities. He told Daniel that he used to be someone important, but lost everything due to betrayal. It was a partial truth, enough to explain his presence on the streets without revealing his plan. Daniel listened without judgment and said, "Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what really matters." That night, as the millionaire lay awake, those words echoed in his mind. He realized that his entire life had been built on accumulating things, wealth, power, recognition. But in doing so, he had lost touch with the raw, unfiltered essence of humanity, compassion, resilience, and connection. Weeks turned into months, and their friendship deepened. They faced countless hardships together: freezing nights, confrontations with hostile gangs, being chased from public spaces by law enforcement. But through it all, Daniel remained unwaveringly kind and selfless. One particularly cold night, they took refuge in an abandoned building. The millionaire developed a severe cough from the damp air and lack of nutrition. Daniel, noticing his deteriorating health, walked miles in the freezing rain to a shelter that distributed free medicine, returning hours later, soaked to the bone but triumphant with a small bottle of cough syrup. The millionaire was stunned. In his former life, he had hired doctors and private nurses at exorbitant fees. Here, a penniless young man risked his own health to care for someone he barely knew. That act of selflessness crystallized something within the millionaire's heart. It wasn't just about finding an heir to his fortune anymore. It was about recognizing the kind of person who deserved the opportunities that wealth could bring. Someone who, despite having nothing, still chose to be good. Throughout history, countless philosophers and spiritual leaders have echoed this truth, that true wealth is measured not by what one owns, but by the goodness one cultivates within. As the millionaire slowly recovered, he began devising the next phase of his plan. He knew that he couldn't remain in this world forever. Sooner or later, he would have to reveal who he truly was, and offer Daniel a chance that could change his life forever. But he also knew that revealing his identity would come with risks. Would Daniel accept his offer, or see it as a betrayal? Would their friendship survive the truth? The millionaire wasn't sure, but what he did know with absolute certainty was that he had finally found someone who saw him not as a source of money or power, but simply as a human being. That alone made all the suffering, all the cold nights and hungry days, worth it. And so, with quiet resolve, he prepared for the moment that would test not only Daniel's integrity, but also his own courage to trust. Again, in the days that followed, the millionaire spent countless hours contemplating how to reveal his true identity to Daniel. The complexity of the situation weighed heavily on his mind. He wasn't just about to disclose that he wasn't homeless, but also that he was in possession of a vast fortune. Wealth that could lift Daniel out of poverty in an instant. Yet he feared that such a revelation might shatter the authenticity of their bond, that Daniel might question whether their entire friendship had been a carefully orchestrated test rather than a genuine connection. One afternoon, while they sat by the riverbank watching the sun set behind the decaying skyline, the millionaire turned to Daniel and asked, "If you had all the money in the world, what would you do?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. He skipped a stone across the water, watching it bounce 4 times before sinking beneath the surface. Then he sighed and said, "I'd start a shelter, a place where no one feels like they're less than human." The millionaire nodded slowly, his throat tightening with emotion. Here was a young man who, despite having nothing, still dreamed of creating a haven for others. It was selflessness at its purest form, something that could not be feigned. Later, that night, the millionaire couldn't sleep. He thought about all the people he had met in the corporate world, men and women who amassed fortunes only to hoard them, building empires while turning their backs on those in need. He realized that Daniel was the antithesis of that mindset. Where others saw the homeless as invisible or burdensome, Daniel saw them as people worthy of dignity and care. This reflection led him to recall the story of Chuck Feeney, the billionaire, who gave away his entire fortune in secret, living a humble life despite his immense wealth. Feeney once said, "It's much more fun to give while you're alive than to give when you're dead." That philosophy resonated deeply with the millionaire now. He had always believed in the power of wealth to transform lives, but had wielded it primarily for personal gain or to expand his business empire. Now he saw wealth in a different light, as a tool, not an identity. Days later, as they sought shelter from a thunderstorm beneath an overpass, the millionaire decided to take a small but significant step toward the truth. He pulled out an old, worn wallet, one he had kept hidden for months, and handed Daniel a $100 bill. Daniel looked at it, eyes wide with shock. "Where did you get this?" he asked. The millionaire smiled faintly and said, "Let's just say I had it tucked away." Without hesitation, Daniel pushed the money back toward him. "You need it more than I do," he insisted. The millionaire felt his chest tighten. Here was undeniable proof of Daniel's character. Even when faced with the rare opportunity for comfort, he thought first of others. But the millionaire pressed him. "Please, take it. Consider it a gift." Daniel finally relented, but instead of spending the money on himself, he used it to buy food and share it with several others who had been hungry for days. The millionaire watched in awe as Daniel distributed sandwiches and water bottles to people scattered along the alleyways and underpasses. That night, as they sat together eating, the millionaire realized something profound. Daniel didn't just talk about compassion. He lived it, embodied it. Psychologists call this prosocial behavior, voluntary actions intended to benefit others. Research consistently shows that individuals with histories of hardship often develop heightened sensitivity to the needs of those around them. This phenomenon was playing out before the millionaire's eyes in the most authentic and moving way possible. Another week passed, and the millionaire knew the moment to fully reveal himself was approaching. But he needed to be sure, not just of Daniel's goodness, but of his own readiness to step out from behind the mask he had worn for months. He arranged to meet with his personal attorney in secret. Under the guise of slipping away for a day, he cleaned up at a cheap motel, put on clean clothes, and met his lawyer in a quiet corner of a coffee shop, far from the streets he now knew so intimately. "I think I've found him," he told the attorney. The lawyer, who had been skeptical of this entire endeavor from the beginning, raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" The millionaire nodded with conviction. "He's everything I was hoping to find, and more." They discussed the legal logistics of transferring part of the millionaire's estate to Daniel, crafting a trust that would secure his future, but also ensure that the money would be used in alignment with Daniel's values, namely to help others. On his way back to the streets, the millionaire felt a mix of exhilaration and dread. How would Daniel react? Would he feel betrayed, manipulated, or would he accept the truth and the offer that would come with it? As he returned to their usual spot beneath the bridge, Daniel greeted him with a warm smile. "Thought you'd ditched me," he joked. The millionaire chuckled, masking the turmoil inside him. Over the following days, he subtly asked Daniel more questions about his life, trying to gather as much detail as possible. He learned that Daniel had grown up in the foster care system, bounced from one unstable home to another, never truly finding a place to belong. At 18, he aged out of the system and was left to fend for himself, eventually landing on the streets after a series of failed jobs and bad luck. Yet despite the hardships, Daniel spoke without bitterness. "It made me who I am," he would say, with a resilience that astounded the millionaire. Finally, one evening, after they had shared a modest meal scavenged from a food bank, the millionaire looked Daniel in the eye and said, "There's something I need to tell you." Daniel tilted his head, sensing the gravity in his friend's voice. The millionaire took a deep breath, his heart pounding. He was about to shatter the reality that had defined their friendship, but he also knew that the truth was necessary, not just for Daniel's sake, but for his own integrity. He began, "I haven't been completely honest with you." Daniel frowned slightly but said nothing, giving him the space to continue. The millionaire swallowed hard and said, "I'm not who you think I am. I'm not homeless. I'm a businessman, a very wealthy one." Silence hung heavy between them. As Daniel processed the words, the millionaire rushed to explain, "I came out here to find someone worthy, someone who understands what it means to have nothing, yet still chooses to be kind, to help others. Someone like you." Daniel stared at him, his expression unreadable. Finally, he whispered, "Why me?" The millionaire smiled softly and said, "Because you've shown me what real strength and compassion look like, and I want to help you make that shelter you dreamed about." Tears welled up in Daniel's eyes, but he quickly wiped them away, looking out at the darkened skyline as if searching for answers among the city lights. The millionaire sat beside him in silence, letting him process everything. In that moment, as the city hummed around them and the cold night air wrapped tightly around their shoulders, both men understood that their lives were about to change forever, not just in terms of wealth or circumstance, but in the fundamental understanding of what it means to be human, to connect, and to trust. The days that followed marked a profound transformation, not just for Daniel, but for the millionaire himself. Having revealed his true identity, the millionaire watched carefully how Daniel responded to this sudden shift in their relationship. It was a delicate dance, a test of trust and authenticity that neither could fully predict. Daniel was quiet. At first, the revelation of wealth and the promise of a future free from hardship seemed almost surreal to him. For someone who had spent years surviving on the streets, the idea that a complete stranger who had become a friend wanted to invest in his dreams was overwhelming. Yet, Daniel never wavered from the values that had guided him through the darkest times. True to his nature, Daniel insisted that the money not be for his personal gain, but to serve the community that had become his extended family. He spoke passionately about creating a space where the lost and forgotten could find shelter, nourishment, and hope. A place where dignity wasn't a luxury, but a given. The millionaire felt a deep respect for Daniel's unwavering commitment to helping others. It reminded him of the very reasons he had disguised himself and walked among those he once overlooked. This was more than an inheritance. It was a partnership built on shared humanity and the desire to heal wounds far beyond material wealth. Together, they began to sketch plans for the shelter, exploring ways to not only provide food and beds, but also offer education, job training, and emotional support. Daniel's lived experience brought invaluable insight into the true needs of the homeless. Community. His stories revealed the gaps in the system, the broken promises, and the harsh realities that statistics alone could never capture. One of the most eye-opening moments came when Daniel introduced the millionaire to some of his closest friends. On the streets, men and women who had endured addiction, abuse, and isolation, but still harbored dreams of rebuilding their lives. The millionaire listened and learned, humbled by their resilience and hope. Philanthropy, he realized, was not just about writing checks. It was about listening, understanding, and empowering. Daniel embodied this lesson. The millionaire's own vision expanded beyond wealth accumulation to fostering true change, rooted in compassion and respect. They began fundraising quietly, reaching out to trusted contacts who valued genuine impact. Over vanity projects, slowly the shelter took shape, not just a building, but a beacon of possibility in a city often indifferent to its most vulnerable. During this process, the millionaire also reflected on his personal journey. His experiment had started as a test to find an heir, but had become a transformative experience that challenged his assumptions about worth and success. Daniel had taught him that true legacy wasn't measured in dollars, but in the lives touched and the hope restored. In late autumn, as the shelter finally opened its doors, a crowd gathered. Volunteers, former homeless individuals, local officials, and the media. Cameras flashed, stories were told, but Daniel remained humble, deflecting praise to the community he served. At the grand opening, Daniel spoke softly yet powerfully. We are all more than our circumstances. No matter where we come from, we have the capacity to change, to love, and to build a better future. The millionaire stood beside him, proud and transformed. He had come seeking an heir and found a teacher, a friend, and a symbol of humanity's enduring spirit. That night, as the city lights twinkled above, the millionaire realized that his greatest fortune was not the wealth he possessed, but the connection he had forged in the unlikeliest of places, a testament to the power of empathy, courage, and the relentless hope that lives within us all. As winter cloaked the city in a blanket of cold and silence, a profound transformation quietly unfolded within the walls of the shelter. It was no longer merely a refuge from the biting wind or the harsh streets. It had become a sanctuary of rebirth, where shattered dreams were carefully pieced back together and lost souls found a renewed sense of purpose. Daniel's vision, born from despair and abandonment, was now flourishing, a living testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the remarkable power of compassion. The millionaire, once a man driven by curiosity and skepticism, now found himself humbled and profoundly changed by what he had witnessed. He came to understand that true wealth is not measured in dollars, properties, or stocks, but in moments of genuine human connection and selfless service. His quest to find a worthy heir, initially a mere test, had unveiled something far more valuable: the inheritance of hope. In the weeks that followed, stories emerged, stories that stirred the heart and restored faith. Individuals who had once wandered the streets aimlessly now found stable jobs, thanks to the training programs Daniel had passionately established. Families long fractured were reunited with tears and laughter, and countless others reclaimed a dignity stripped away by the cruel streets. The shelter had become a beacon of light amid darkness, a living proof that kindness and solidarity possess the power to change the trajectory of entire lives. Daniel's humble yet passionate leadership inspired others to see beyond labels and cold statistics. He taught them to recognize the humanity reflected in every face, every story, no matter how battered or broken. Thanks to his example, many began to question their own preconceived notions about poverty and exclusion, realizing that beneath every exterior lies a universe of dreams, fears, and hopes waiting to be acknowledged. One snowy evening, as delicate flakes drifted softly beyond the shelter's windows, Daniel and the millionaire sat side by side beside the crackling fire in the common room. The warm glow of the flames filled the room with an intimate, reflective atmosphere. It was then that the millionaire handed Daniel a small, well-worn journal, the very notebook where he had recorded his observations, lessons, and moments of revelation throughout his journey on the streets. "This belongs to you now," the millionaire said quietly, "not just as a symbol of what we've built, but as a reminder that every story matters. Your story matters." Daniel took the journal, tears glistening in his eyes, feeling the weight of the past and the promise of the future intertwined within those fragile pages. The inheritance was no longer about wealth or possessions. It was about purpose, legacy, and the unbreakable bonds forged in adversity. In that moment, the millionaire realized his journey had come full circle. He had disguised himself to test others, but ultimately it was he who had been tested and transformed. The streets, once seen as merciless and unforgiving, had revealed the deepest truths of humanity. The strength born from vulnerability, the power found in kindness, and the dignity inherent in every life. As they gazed out at the snowy night, a sense of peace and hope settled between them, a silent vow to continue the work, to keep the flame of hope alive in a world too often clouded by indifference and selfishness. The millionaire smiled softly, understanding that sometimes the greatest riches are not found in what we possess, but in what we give. And the most worthy heir is not the one who inherits gold, but the one who carries the light forward, no matter the obstacles along the path. With that conviction, both men committed themselves to ensuring that more people like Daniel could discover that no matter how dark life's corners may seem, there is always an opportunity to rise, to shine, and to transform the world through love and courage. This story does not end with a transfer of fortune, but with an eternal legacy of love, bravery, and unwavering faith that every soul deserves the chance to shine and change its destiny. It is a powerful reminder that in the end, what we leave behind is not the wealth we accumulate, but the impact we have on the lives we touch.